For 45 years, I transformed a modest starter house into a cherished neighborhood landmark with my own hands, until my nephew and his wife decided I was too frail to live independently and tried to sell my property while I was recovering from a minor surgery. But the day they brought potential buyers to tour what they called a soon-to-be-available charmer, their rehearsed speech died in their throats. They had no idea that while I was teaching quilting classes at the community center and tending my award-winning garden, I had also become a licensed real estate agent with enough legal knowledge to not only block their sale, but to expose their scheme to the entire family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined spending my golden years fighting for the right to remain in my own home. At 73, I had envisioned peaceful mornings in my garden, afternoons teaching quilting at the community center, and evenings on my wraparound porch watching the neighborhood children play, just as I had for decades. Instead, I found myself at the center of a family drama that tested not only my resilience, but my understanding of those I thought I knew best. My name is Dorothy Winters. My late husband Frank and I purchased our home on Maple Street in the small town of Riverdale in 1976, when we were newlyweds with more dreams than dollars. It was a modest two-bedroom bungalow then, with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds, but it was ours. Frank worked at the local paper mill, while I taught third grade at Riverdale Elementary. We weren't wealthy by any measure, but we were careful with our money and rich in determination. "This place has good bones," Frank said the day we moved in, running his hands along the worn but solid wood trim around the windows. "It just needs some love and patience." Love and patience we had in abundance, even when money was tight. That first summer, we scraped together enough to replace the roof, Frank doing most of the work himself with help from his brother Edward and a few friends from the mill. I learned to strip and refinish wood, transforming the dingy cabinets in the kitchen into gleaming oak showcases. We planted our first garden in the backyard, tomatoes, peppers, and zucchini that produced so abundantly we shared with half the neighborhood. Over the years, with Frank's carpentry skills and my design ideas, we transformed that humble starter home into something special. We added a second story when our daughter Sarah was born, built the wraparound porch that became the envy of the neighborhood, and planted the garden that would eventually win the Riverdale Horticultural Society's Best Residential Garden Award, 12 years running. Every inch of our home had been touched by our hands, shaped by our vision, infused with our love. "A house becomes a home through thousands of small decisions," Frank used to say, "each one a testament to what you value, what you're willing to work for." What we valued was a place where family gathered, where neighbors felt welcome, where memories could be created and cherished. The kitchen table where Sarah learned to read and later struggled through algebra homework. The backyard where we hosted 4th of July barbecues for 30 years running. The living room where our small church group met weekly for prayer and support during difficult times. Frank passed away 8 years ago, a sudden stroke while he was repairing Mrs. Henderson's fence next door. He was always helping neighbors with projects, refusing payment but never turning down a slice of pie or a glass of lemonade. "Community is built one good turn at a time," he would say, a philosophy that shaped our life on Maple Street. I still remember the day of his funeral, how our modest home overflowed with people from every corner of Riverdale. The mill workers who had retired alongside Frank, my former students, now grown with children of their own, neighbors past and present. The house embraced them all, just as Frank would have wanted, its walls seeming to expand to hold the community he had helped nurture over decades. After Frank died, many people assumed I would sell the house and move into something smaller, perhaps one of those senior living communities on the edge of town. "It's too much house for one person," they would say, not understanding that these walls held more than memories. They held my identity, my purpose, my connection to the life Frank and I had built together. have you thought about what's next? Well-meaning friends would ask, their tone suggesting that widowhood at 65 necessarily meant downsizing, retreating, diminishing. This is what's next, I would answer, gesturing to the home around me. Frank may be gone, but our life's work is still here, and so am I. Instead of downsizing, I threw myself into maintaining and even improving our home. I took woodworking classes at the community college so I could keep up with the repairs Frank used to handle. I expanded the garden to include a vegetable patch that now supplies half the neighborhood with fresh produce in summer. I converted the spare bedroom into a quilting studio where I create the pieces that have become locally famous, selling at the town's artisan market to supplement my teacher's pension. What few people realized was that my dedication to maintaining our home went beyond emotional attachment. It was also practical. In a town like Riverdale, where housing costs had risen steadily over the years, I couldn't have afforded to buy a new place, even a smaller one, without taking on a mortgage at an age when such options are limited. Property taxes on our home were manageable thanks to senior exemptions, and years of careful upgrades meant maintenance costs were reasonable. Financially and emotionally, staying put made perfect sense. It also allowed me to remain at the heart of the community we had helped build, the young family across the street who relied on my after-school supervision of their twins. Mrs. Henderson next door, now 92, who needed daily check-ins and occasional grocery runs. The neighborhood children who gathered on my porch for homemade cookies and stories about old Riverdale when their parents needed a break. You're the neighborhood's living memory, Mabel Jenkins, my oldest friend and former town clerk, often told me. You remember who lived where, who feuded with whom, which houses were moved after the flood of '94. That kind of history matters. Our daughter Sarah lives 3 hours away in the city with her husband Tom and their 2 children. She's a corporate attorney with a demanding career that leaves little time for visits, though she calls faithfully every Sunday evening. I'm proud of her success, but sometimes wistful for the days when she lived closer. Her busy life means she can't check on me as often as she might like, a situation that my nephew Roger, Frank's brother's son, took upon himself to remedy. Roger had always been a frequent visitor to our home during his childhood. Edward lived just one town over, and whenever tensions rose in their household, which was often, given Edward's difficult marriage, Roger would bike the 5 miles to our place, arriving sweaty and sometimes tearful, knowing he'd find sanctuary with Uncle Frank and Aunt Dorothy. This house feels safe, he once told me when he was about 12, helping me roll out pie dough in the kitchen after a particularly bad fight at his home. Like nothing bad can happen here. We'd done our best to make that true for him, providing the stability his own home lacked. Frank taught him carpentry and fishing. I helped with homework and made sure he had someone to talk to about the challenges of adolescence. When he graduated high school and headed to state college, we attended the ceremony in Edward's stead, Edward having forgotten the date despite our reminders. Roger and his wife Diane moved to Riverdale 5 years ago when he took a position as branch manager at the local bank. Having family nearby again was initially a comfort. They would invite me for Sunday dinners, help with occasional heavy lifting around the house, and keep an eye on my place when I visited Sarah during the holidays. Roger had always expressed fondness for the house, calling it his second home growing up. I have more happy memories in this house than in the one I grew up in, he once told Diane in my presence, running his hand along the kitchen counter where he'd spent so many hours baking with me. Aunt Dorothy and Uncle Frank knew how to make a real home. The comment had warmed my heart at the time. Now, looking back, I wonder if it revealed something else, an envy or possessiveness I hadn't recognized. Shortly after their move to Riverdale, Roger and Diane purchased a home in Lakeside Estates, a new development on the outskirts of town. It was impressive. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Very different from My comfortable but modest home on Maple Street. It's an investment, Roger explained during my first visit. Property values in this development are projected to increase 20% in the next 5 years. I nodded politely, though the home felt sterile to me. Too perfect, too untouched by life. No scuffs on the hardwood to mark where children had played. No slight unevenness in the bathroom tile to reminisce about the weekend Frank had installed it. No worn spot on the kitchen counter where decades of meal preparation had left their mark. Perhaps I should have recognized the shift in his attitude sooner. The concerned comments about my managing alone began about 2 years ago, around the time that housing prices in Riverdale started climbing due to an influx of commuters from the city seeking small-town charm with reasonable drive times. "Aunt Dorothy, this house is becoming a lot for you to handle," Roger would say, noticing a gutter that needed cleaning or a fence post that had come loose. "Have you thought about what's next?" "I'm handling it just fine," I would assure him, not mentioning that I'd already scheduled the handyman to take care of those issues, or that at 73, I was still perfectly capable of overseeing my own home maintenance. Diane was less subtle. "This neighborhood is really becoming desirable," she would remark, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone during visits. "The Johnsons down the street just sold for triple what they paid in the 90s. Triple. You're sitting on a gold mine, Dorothy." I would smile and change the subject. The house had never been an investment to me. It was home, the setting for a lifetime of joys and sorrows, the physical manifestation of the life Frank and I had built together. Its value couldn't be calculated in dollars. "You know, they're building those lovely senior apartments near the community center," Diane mentioned during one visit, her tone deliberately casual. "All one level, no maintenance required. And they have activities so you wouldn't be so isolated." "I'm hardly isolated," I replied, gesturing toward the calendar on my refrigerator filled with community engagements, volunteer commitments, and social activities. "And I prefer a home where I can garden and quilt and host my neighborhood children." "But it would be so much easier," she persisted. "No lawn to mow, no gutters to clean, no stairs to navigate as you get older." I didn't bother pointing out that I had hired a neighborhood teenager to mow the lawn years ago, that the gutters had been covered with guards after Frank's passing, or that we had deliberately renovated to include a bedroom and full bath on the main floor as we aged. These were practical solutions to practical problems, not reasons to abandon a perfectly good home. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that Roger and Diane's interest in my next chapter was far from altruistic. Their casual questions about my finances, their increasing insistence on helping with my paperwork, their offers to update my will with their connections at a law firm, all of it was leading somewhere I never imagined family could go. I did notice their interest intensify after Mrs. Henderson's son moved her to an assisted living facility following a fall. Her house, similar to mine in age and style, sold within a week for a price that raised eyebrows throughout the neighborhood. "Did you see how quickly the Henderson place went?" Diane asked during their next visit, her eyes gleaming with an enthusiasm that struck me as unseemly, given that the sale represented the end of Mrs. Henderson's independence. "And they say there were multiple offers above asking price." "Martha didn't want to leave," I said quietly. "Her son made that decision. For her after the fall." "Well, it was probably for the best," Diane replied dismissively. "She couldn't have managed alone much longer at her age." The comment chilled me slightly, containing as it did the unspoken assumption that advancing age necessarily meant diminished capacity. I had seen it happen with other friends, well-meaning family members making decisions for their own good that ignored decades of demonstrated competence and clear-stated preferences. Martha was still lucid and mobile, I pointed out. She just needed more support at home, which the community was providing until her son stepped in. "Family knows best." Roger interjected with a finality that ended the discussion, but lingered in my mind long afterward. During this period, I had been quietly taking steps to protect my independence that neither Roger nor Diane knew about. After witnessing several elderly friends lose control of their lives to well-meaning but overreaching family members, I had decided to educate myself about my rights and options. It began with a conversation with Mabel, who had witnessed similar scenarios during her 30 years as town clerk. "The problem is that most seniors don't know their legal rights until it's too late," she told me over coffee one morning. "By the time they realize what's happening, decisions have been made, papers have been signed, and it's an uphill battle to regain control." "What would you recommend?" I asked, thinking not of myself specifically, but of our aging community in general. She didn't hesitate. "First, make sure your legal affairs are in order with professionals who represent your interests, not your family's. Second, stay engaged with the community so there are witnesses to your continued competence. And third," she paused, her expression serious, "consider getting your real estate license." The suggestion caught me by surprise. "My real estate license? Mabel, I'm 73. I'm not looking to start a new career." She laughed. "Not as a career, Dorothy. As protection. Michigan has some peculiar laws about property transfers and capacity. Real estate agents have a different level of presumed competence when it comes to property matters. It can be a shield if someone tries to claim you're not capable of managing your affairs, particularly your home." The idea was intriguing. I had always enjoyed learning new things, and the prospect of a course of study that would both engage my mind and potentially protect my independence was appealing. Within a week, I had enrolled in the required classes at the community college, the same place where I took my woodworking course. For 6 months, I studied property law, contracts, ethics, and market analysis. At 73, I was by far the oldest student in the class, but my experience as a teacher had made me a disciplined learner, and my decades of home ownership provided practical context for the material. When I passed the state licensing exam, with a score of 94%, my instructor suggested I consider actually practicing in the field. "You have a natural talent for this," he told me. "Your combination of life experience and people skills would make you an excellent agent, especially for older clients navigating difficult transitions." I thanked him but explained that my interest was primarily educational. I didn't mention my underlying motivation, the growing sense that I might need this knowledge sooner than I had anticipated. I kept my licensing achievement quiet, not out of secrecy, but because it simply didn't come up in conversation. Roger and Diane were busy with their own lives, and our interactions had become less frequent and more perfunctory over time. Sarah knew. I had mentioned it during one of our Sunday calls, but she saw it as just another of her mother's continuous education efforts. Like the Master Gardener certification I had earned 5 years earlier, or the advanced quilting techniques I had studied in workshops across the state. "Always learning something new," she had said with affectionate pride. "You put my continuing education credits to shame, Mom." The catalyst for everything that followed was a scheduled knee replacement, a routine procedure to address years of wear and tear from gardening and standing in classrooms. Nothing serious, nothing life-threatening, simply a necessary maintenance of an aging body, not unlike the occasional need to replace worn shingles on a beloved home. When I mentioned the upcoming surgery during a rare dinner at Roger and Diane's, their reaction was immediate and oddly intense. "You'll need somewhere to recover," Diane insisted, setting down her fork with a decisiveness that brooked no argument. "Somewhere without stairs with people to help you. You'll stay with us. Of course." Her insistence struck me as excessive. My bedroom and full bath were on the main floor, a deliberate renovation Frank and I had made as we got older. I had already arranged for a home health aide to visit during the first week post-surgery, and my neighbors had organized a meal train to ensure I would have proper nutrition during recovery. "Riverdale takes care of its own." "That's very kind," I told her. "But I've made arrangements to recover at home." Sarah is taking a week off to help with the initial transition, and after that, I'll have plenty of support." "Sarah?" Diane's tone was dismissive. "She'll fly in, fuss around for a few days, then rush back to her important job and leave you struggling. No, you need family who are here, who understand what's best for you at this stage of life." That phrase, "at this stage of life," should have been my warning. It carried assumptions about diminished capacity, about decisions that should be taken out of my hands, about a woman in her 70s being less capable of directing her own life than a woman in her 40s or a man in his 50s. Instead, I accepted it as well-intentioned concern, perhaps a bit overbearing but coming from a place of care. "I appreciate your concern," I said firmly, "but I'm comfortable with the plans I've made." Diane pressed her lips together in that way she had, when dissatisfied but unwilling to show it openly. "Well, if you change your mind, our guest room is always available." I thanked her again and thought the matter settled. The surgery was scheduled for May 15th, with Sarah arriving the day before to help prepare the house for my recovery period. Everything was arranged, every contingency considered. What I didn't couldn't have imagined, was that Roger and Diane had made arrangements of their own. Arrangements that had nothing to do with my welfare and everything to do with the gold mine they believed I was sitting on. The surgery went smoothly. I spent 2 nights in the hospital, with Sarah by my side throughout. She had transformed my living room into a recovery station with everything I might need within reach: books, water, medications, phone, laptop, even the television remote. Controlled by a smartphone app she installed for me. My quilting friend Mabel had organized the neighbors into shifts, ensuring someone would check on me morning and afternoon for the first month. "Mom, are you sure you don't want me to stay longer?" Sarah asked the night before she was scheduled to return to the city. "I can work remotely for another week if you need me." "Absolutely not," I insisted. "Your big case is coming up and I'm fine. The pain is manageable, I'm moving better each day, and I have an army of Riverdale's finest looking after me. Go be brilliant in court." She kissed my forehead, just as I had done countless times during her childhood illnesses. "Call me for anything, big or small. Promise?" "Promise," I assured her, touched by the role reversal but confident in my recovery plan. Sarah left the next morning, and my carefully arranged support system functioned beautifully. Mabel brought lunch and checked my bandages. Mrs. Peterson, across the street, delivered a casserole and stayed for a chat in the afternoon. The home health aide visited to assist with exercises prescribed by the physical therapist. Roger and Diane called but didn't visit, which struck me as odd given their previous insistence on being involved in my recovery. "We don't want to tire you with too many visitors," Roger explained when I mentioned their absence. "We'll check in next week when you're stronger." The explanation seemed reasonable, though not entirely consistent with their earlier concern. Still, I was grateful for the space to recover at my own pace, in my own home, surrounded by the familiar comforts that made the pain and limited mobility more bearable. 6 days after surgery, I was surprised by an unexpected ring of the doorbell, during what was usually a quiet afternoon hour. Using my walker, which I hated but obediently used to prevent falls, I made my slow way to the front door. Through the sidelight window, I could see Roger standing on my porch. Beside him stood a couple I didn't recognize, the woman smartly dressed in a blazer despite the May heat, the man carrying what looked like a portfolio under his arm. Behind them, I glimpsed Diane waiting by a luxury SUV parked in my driveway. Curious, but not yet alarmed, I opened the door. "Aunt Dorothy." Roger's surprise seemed excessive, given that he was the one visiting my home unannounced. "What are you doing up and around?" Answering my door, I replied with mild confusion. "Is everything all right?" His gaze darted to the strangers, then back to me. "We thought you were resting. Diane said she called earlier and got no answer." I had silenced my phone during my afternoon nap, a new habit during recovery, but that didn't explain why they had brought strangers to my home without warning. "Roger," I said directly. "Who are these people?" The woman stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Heather Blackwell from Panorama Realty. This is my associate, Jim Cortez. Your nephew mentioned you might be interested in exploring options for your property, and we were in the neighborhood, so—" "My property?" I interrupted, my confusion giving way to the first stirrings of alarm. "I'm not interested in exploring options for my home." Roger's laugh was too loud, too forced. "Aunt Dorothy, remember our discussions? About downsizing to something more manageable? After the surgery, you mentioned being concerned about maintaining the house. I had said no such thing. Not after surgery, not ever." "There must be a misunderstanding," I said firmly, looking directly at the realtors. "I have no intention of selling my home. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm recovering from surgery and need to rest." The woman, Heather, exchanged a glance with Roger. "Perhaps we caught you at a bad time. Your nephew mentioned you've been experiencing some confusion since the medication." "I am not confused," I stated clearly, anger beginning to replace confusion. "And I would appreciate it if all of you would leave now." Jim, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we understand this is a difficult transition to consider. Many of our older clients feel the same way initially, but once they see the numbers—" He began opening his portfolio, revealing what looked like a market analysis of my property. At that moment, two things became crystal clear. First, this was not a casual visit, but a planned showing of my home to real estate agents. Second, Roger had been discussing my supposed diminished capacity and creating a narrative of confusion that didn't exist. "Roger," I said, my voice steady despite the shock coursing through me, "please take these people and leave my property immediately. We will discuss this later, privately." His expression hardened momentarily before he forced another smile. "Of course, Aunt Dorothy. You're tired. We should have called ahead. Let's reschedule when you're feeling more yourself." More myself. As if my rejection of their presumption was a symptom of illness rather than a rational response to an outrageous situation. I closed the door as they retreated, then made my slow way to the window to ensure they actually left. Through the curtains, I watched Roger gesture animatedly to Diane, who appeared agitated in response. The realtors stood by their separate car, Heather speaking on her phone while Jim consulted something on a tablet. What I had just experienced seemed impossible. Family members attempting to sell my home without my knowledge or consent, using my temporary physical vulnerability as an opportunity. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The question now was, how far had this gone, and what else didn't I know? I made my way to the phone and called the one person who would help me navigate this betrayal with both emotional support and practical advice. My oldest friend, Mabel Jenkins, who had been Riverdale's town clerk for 30 years before retirement, and knew more about property law and local regulations than anyone else in our community. "Mabel?" I said when she answered, my voice finally betraying the tremor of shock I'd been suppressing. "I need your help. Something's happening with Roger and my house, and I think I may need more than just a friend right now. I might need a lawyer." Little did Roger and Diane know that their carefully orchestrated plan was about to encounter an obstacle they never anticipated. A 73-year-old woman who was far from ready to be marginalized, manipulated, or moved out of the home. She had earned through decades of love and labor. Their mistake wasn't just ethical or moral, it was strategic. They had severely underestimated who they were dealing with, and they were about to discover just how costly that miscalculation would be. Mabel arrived at my home 20 minutes after my call, her practical sedan pulling into the driveway just as the sun was beginning to set. I watched from the window as she gathered several folders from her passenger seat. Typical Mabel, already prepared with research and resources before I'd even explained the full situation. "You look better than I expected for someone who had knee surgery last week," she remarked as I let her in, her sharp eyes taking in my walker and the slight wince I couldn't quite hide when I shifted my weight. "The surgery went well. It's the family situation that's causing the real pain," I replied, leading her to the living room where I had set out tea and the lemon cookies she had always favored. For the next half hour, I detailed everything. The gradual escalation of Roger and Diane's comments about my house being too much for me, their insistence that I recover from surgery at their home, and finally, the unannounced visit with realtors who clearly believed they had authorization to begin the selling process. Mabel listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, she set down her teacup with a decisive click against the saucer. "This is more common than you'd think," she said, confirming my worst fears. "I saw it regularly during my years at town hall. Family members attempting to make decisions about an elder's property without proper authorization, often using a temporary health issue as leverage. But I never signed anything," I insisted. "I've never indicated any desire to sell or given Roger power to act on my behalf." "That's good," Mabel nodded. "However, we need to determine how far this has progressed. The fact that they brought realtors for what appeared to be a formal assessment suggests they may have taken steps beyond mere discussion." She opened one of her folders, revealing a legal pad filled with her meticulous handwriting. "I've outlined several immediate actions we should take. First, we need to verify your property records at the county office to ensure no documents have been filed without your knowledge." "Is that even possible?" I asked, horrified at the thought. "Unfortunately, yes. There have been cases of fraudulent transfers, especially between family members when one party has access to personal documents." She hesitated before continuing. "Dorothy, when was the last time you checked your important papers? Your deed? Your will? Your financial information?" The question sent a chill through me. I kept my essential documents in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet, a location Roger knew about from the days following Frank's death, when he had helped me organize financial matters. I hadn't had reason to check those papers in months. "Should look at them right now," I said, already reaching for my walker. "Let me," Mabel offered, standing. "Where are they kept?" I directed her to the bedroom closet and described the box and its combination lock. While she was gone, I tried to steady my racing thoughts. Surely Roger wouldn't have gone so far as to tamper with my legal documents? Despite his recent behavior, he was still the boy who had found sanctuary in our home, who had learned carpentry at Frank's side, who had always expressed gratitude for our role in his life. When Mabel returned carrying the fireproof box, her expression told me everything before she spoke a word. "It's been disturbed," she said, setting the box on the coffee table between us. "Some papers are out of order, and there are blank spots in your document folders where items should be." With growing alarm, we inventoried the contents. My husband's death certificate was there, as were our marriage license and my birth certificate. But the property deed was missing, as was a copy of my will and the power of attorney document I had established naming Sarah, not Roger, as my healthcare proxy. "This is beyond concerning," Mabel said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We need to move quickly. Fortunately, your real estate license gives us an advantage they wouldn't have anticipated." She was right. My license, earned for educational purposes rather than professional practice, established a legal presumption of competence in property, matters that would be difficult to overcome, even with claims of medication-induced confusion or age-related decline. "What's our first step?" I asked, professional focus replacing the initial shock and hurt. "We begin with the county records." "Office," Mabel decided. "First thing tomorrow morning, we'll verify the current status of your deed and ensure no transfers or liens have been filed. Then we'll visit your attorney to create new, secure copies of your will and power of attorney documents with explicit language revoking any previous versions." "And what about Roger and Diane?" I asked, the pain of their betrayal settling into something harder, more resolute. "Do I confront them directly?" Mabel considered this carefully. Not yet. Information is our advantage right now. If they don't, know we're aware of the full extent of their actions. We have time to secure your position before they can create additional complications. It was sound advice, aligned with the strategic thinking I had developed during decades of teaching and homemaking, both roles that required careful planning and the ability to manage difficult situations with calm authority. You're right, I agreed. We gather information first, then act from a position of strength. Exactly. Mabel smiled, a hint of the formidable town clerk who had kept Riverdale's records and officials in perfect order for 30 years. And speaking of information, there's one more thing we should check tonight. She pulled out her tablet. Mabel had embraced technology with an enthusiasm that put many younger residents to shame, and opened a real estate listing website. Let's see if they've gone so far as to list your property, even preliminarily, she explained, typing in my address. Nothing appeared under my street address, which provided momentary relief until Mabel tried a different search parameter. Coming. Soon listings in Riverdale, and there it was, not yet publicly listed but visible in a section for agent previews and advance notifications. Charming historic home in desirable Maple Street neighborhood. Original features with modern updates. Ideal for renovation or investment opportunity. Coming to market June 2023. No address was listed, but the description matched my home perfectly, right down to the award-winning perennial gardens, mentioned in the amenities section. The listing agent was Heather Blackwell, the same woman who had stood on my porch that afternoon. They've already started the process, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the betrayal evidenced on the screen before us. They're planning to list my home next month without my consent. This is actually helpful evidence, Mabel pointed out, her practical nature focusing on strategy rather than outrage. It demonstrates clear intent and preparation, which will strengthen our position when we do take action. She was right, of course. The premature listing was not just an ethical violation, but potentially a legal one as well, something that would be of particular interest to the Real Estate Commission that had granted me my license less than a year earlier. We need to document everything, I decided. Create a timeline of Roger and Diane's comments and actions leading up to this, preserve any texts or emails that show their increasing focus on my property, and gather witness statements from neighbors who can attest to my ongoing independence and home maintenance. Mabel looked at me with approval. You're thinking like the educator you've always been, methodical, evidence-based, thorough. This is exactly the approach we need. We spent the next several hours creating a comprehensive documentation plan. Mabel would handle the county record search and coordinate with my attorney, while I would compile a detailed history of my interactions with Roger and Diane over the past year, focusing on any discussions related to my house or my independent living situation. By the time Mabel left that evening, we had a clear strategy and timeline. Tomorrow would be devoted to information gathering and legal reinforcement. The day after, if all went as planned, we would begin the counteroffensive. Try to rest, Mabel advised as she prepared to leave. Your recovery is still important, and we'll need you at full strength for what's ahead. I promised to follow my post-surgery care instructions, but sleep proved elusive that night. The knowledge that family members, people I had loved and trusted, had systematically planned to dispose of my home without my consent, left a wound far deeper than the surgical incision on my knee. What troubled me most wasn't just the potential financial loss or even the disruption to my life, but the fundamental disrespect their actions represented. They had decided that my preferences, my autonomy, my lifetime of demonstrated competence were irrelevant, that they knew better what should happen to the home I had built with Frank, maintained through widowhood, and transformed into a cornerstone of our neighborhood community. Such disregard cut to the heart of fears many aging individuals face: the fear of being dismissed, of having agency stripped away, of being treated as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I had seen it happen to friends and never imagined I would face the same painful diminishment, especially from family. By morning, however, the hurt had crystallized into resolve. This was not just about keeping my home, though that remained non-negotiable. It was about establishing a precedent, for myself and for others who might face similar situations. It was about demonstrating that age did not equal incapacity, that the right to self-determination didn't expire at some arbitrary birthday. With that clarity of purpose, I began the day with renewed energy despite the discomfort in my healing knee. Following my physical therapist's instructions, I performed the prescribed exercises before settling at the kitchen table with my laptop and phone, ready to compile the documentation we had planned. I started with a chronological list of every comment Roger and Diane had made about my home, my independence, or my future living arrangements over the past 2 years. The pattern, when laid out sequentially, was striking. A gradual escalation from occasional suggestions about easier living options to increasingly direct pressure to consider selling, particularly after neighborhood property values began to rise dramatically. Next, I searched my email and text messages for any written communications that would support this timeline. There weren't many. Roger and Diane preferred to have these conversations in person, but what existed was telling. A text from Roger after Mrs. Henderson moved out. Her house sold for $75,000 over asking. Something to think about. An email from Diane forwarding information about senior apartments, just in case you ever want to simplify your life. Small things. In isolation, but part of a larger pattern when viewed collectively. By mid-morning, Mabel called with news from the county records office. "Your deed is still securely in your name," she reported, the relief evident in her voice. "No transfers, no quitclaim actions, no liens or encumbrances have been filed." "That's something, at least," I said, making a note in my growing documentation file. "There's more," Mabel continued. "I checked with the Real Estate Commission, and that coming soon listing we found is problematic from a licensing perspective. Without a signed listing agreement from the legal property owner, you, the agent, is violating professional standards by creating even a preview listing." This was useful leverage. So Heather Blackwell has potentially jeopardized her professional standing by working with Roger on this? "Precisely," Mabel confirmed, "which gives us another angle to pursue when we're ready to act. I've already scheduled an appointment with Harold Bennett at his law office for tomorrow morning. He's reviewed your situation and agrees we need to move quickly." Harold Bennett had been Riverdale's most respected attorney for 4 decades. He had handled Frank's will and the subsequent estate matters, and though I hadn't needed his services in recent years, I trusted his judgment implicitly. "Perfect," I agreed. "I should have a complete documentation package ready by then." After ending the call with Mabel, I continued my information gathering, expanding to include photographs of my home's current condition, evidence of my continued ability to maintain the property properly, and a list of community activities that demonstrated my ongoing engagement and capacity. I was in the midst of this work when my phone rang again, this time displaying Roger's number. I hesitated, remembering Mabel's advice about maintaining our information advantage by not revealing how much we knew. After the 4th ring, I answered with a deliberately neutral tone. "Hello, Roger." "Aunt Dorothy," he began, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I had come to recognize as inauthentic. "How are you feeling today? Better rested, I hope." "Much better, thank you," I replied, matching his light tone while my free hand continued making notes for my documentation file. Good. Listen, about yesterday, I think there was some confusion. Heather and Jim are friends who happen to be in real estate, and they were just dropping by to say hello. I mentioned your surgery, and they thought they'd pay a courtesy visit. The lie was so blatant it almost took my breath away. I had literally heard them introduce themselves as realtors there to discuss my property. "Is that so?" I said, keeping my voice even. "How thoughtful of them. Though I'm curious why they brought property valuations and market analyses for a courtesy visit." A brief silence followed. "Well, You know how real estate people are, always thinking about business. They probably just had that material with them from another appointment. Probably, I agreed, not believing it for a moment. In any case, I'm quite busy today with recovery exercises and some paperwork that needs attention. Was there something specific you needed? His hesitation was palpable. Actually, Diane and I were hoping to stop by this evening to discuss something important. Family matters, you know. So they were planning to try again, perhaps with a different approach now that the realtor surprise had failed. This might actually provide useful information for our documentation. I'm afraid today won't work, I said, infusing my voice with apologetic regret. The physical therapist is coming at 4, and I'll need to rest afterward, perhaps later in the week? This is fairly urgent, Aunt Dorothy, he pressed, a note of frustration creeping into his tone. It's about your long-term care and some options we've been researching. We're concerned about you being alone during recovery. That's very thoughtful, I replied. But as I mentioned before, I have excellent support from neighbors and health professionals. My recovery is progressing exactly as planned. But I really must go now, Roger. My knee exercises need my full attention. Why don't we plan for Friday? That would give me a few more days to regain my strength. Friday would be perfect timing, after my meeting with Harold Bennett and the implementation of the legal protections we were planning. Roger agreed reluctantly, and we ended the call with artificial pleasantries. As soon as we disconnected, I added the call to my documentation timeline, noting his false explanation of the realtor visit and his urgency about discussing long-term care options. The remainder of the day passed in a productive blur of documentation and preparation. By evening, I had assembled a comprehensive file that included a detailed timeline of Roger and Diane's comments and actions regarding my home copies of relevant emails, texts, and the coming soon listing. Photographs documenting the excellent condition of my property. Statements from 3 neighbors attesting to my ongoing independence and community engagement. My most recent medical records, showing no cognitive concerns. Copies of my real estate license and continuing education certificates. Records of home maintenance and improvements over the past 5 years. Together, these materials told a compelling story, not of an elderly woman unable to manage her affairs, but of a capable homeowner whose property had become the target of opportunistic family members amid rising real estate values. The next morning, Mabel arrived promptly at 9:30 to drive me to Harold Bennett's law office. Despite my improving mobility, the walker remained necessary for longer distances, and Mabel's sedan was easier to navigate than attempting to drive myself. "You look like a woman with a plan," she observed as she helped me settle into the passenger seat. "I am," I confirmed, patting the expandable file folder containing my documentation. "And so much more evidence than I initially expected. It's rather eye-opening to review 2 years of interactions through this new lens." Harold Bennett's office was located in a converted Victorian home near the town center, its interior maintaining the original woodwork and character while functioning as a modern legal practice. He greeted us personally in the reception area, his tall frame slightly more stooped than I remembered, but his handshake still firm and his eyes sharp behind silver-rimmed glasses. "Dorothy," he said warmly, "it's been too long, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "As do I, Harold," I replied as he led us to his office, a book-lined room that smelled pleasantly of leather and lemon polish. Once seated, I presented the documentation file, which Harold reviewed with methodical thoroughness, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes on a yellow legal pad. When he finally looked up, his expression was both concerned and resolute. "This is one of the more comprehensive cases of attempted elder exploitation I've seen," he said, his direct manner one of the qualities that had always made him an effective advocate. "The good news is that you've caught it before any legal damage has been done. Your property remains securely in your name, and your early intervention means we can establish strong protections moving forward." "What specifically do you recommend?" I asked. Several immediate actions, he replied, turning to a fresh page in his notepad. First, we'll create a new will and advance directives that explicitly revoke any previous versions, with specific language addressing property decisions. Second, we'll file a formal complaint with the Real Estate Commission regarding the unauthorized listing. Third, we'll prepare cease and desist letters to both the realty company and to Roger and Diane, clearly establishing that you have not authorized any actions regarding your property. He paused, looking at me directly. And finally, I suggest, we consider a conversation with the Riverdale Police Department. What Roger and Diane have attempted, and may still be planning, potentially crosses the line from unethical to illegal, particularly if they removed documents from your home without permission. The suggestion of police involvement was jarring. Despite everything, part of me still saw Roger as the vulnerable boy who had found refuge in our home, not as someone whose actions might warrant legal consequences. I'm not sure I'm ready for that step, I admitted. At least not yet. I want to secure my position and stop their current efforts. But criminal charges against family members... Harold nodded understanding. We can hold that option in reserve. Let's focus on the civil protections first and see how they respond. Sometimes a formal legal warning is sufficient to end these situations. For the next 2 hours, we worked through each document, the new will naming Sarah as my sole heir and executor, the healthcare proxy giving her decision-making authority if I became incapacitated, the property trust that would provide additional protection for my home, and finally, the cease and desist letters that would formally notify all parties of my awareness and opposition to their actions. I'll have these ready for your signature tomorrow, Harold assured me as our meeting concluded. In the meantime, I suggest maintaining minimal contact with Roger and Diane. If they call, keep conversations brief and non-committal. Don't agree to any meetings or document reviews without Mabel or me present. As Mabel drove me home, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that we were taking concrete steps to protect my home, sadness that family relationships had deteriorated to this point, and a surprising sense of empowerment that came from actively defending my rights, rather than becoming a passive victim of others' machinations. You know, Mabel observed as we turned onto Maple Street, there's a certain poetic justice in using your real estate license to stop an unauthorized sale of your property. It's almost as if you had a premonition when you decided to take those classes. Less premonition than preparation, I replied. After seeing what happened to Martha Henderson and others, I wanted to understand the system better. I never imagined I'd be using that knowledge against family. As we approached my house, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a black, luxury sedan with rental plates. For a moment, I tensed, wondering if Roger had decided to make another unannounced visit despite our phone conversation. That's not Roger's car, Mabel said, echoing my thoughts. Should we drive past and come back later? No, I decided. This is my home. I'm not going to avoid it because of unexpected visitors. As Mabel parked at the curb, the front door opened, and a tall figure emerged onto the porch, my daughter, Sarah, who was supposed to be in the city preparing for her important case. "Mom!" she called, hurrying down the steps as Mabel helped me from the car. "Thank goodness you're okay. I've been trying to reach you all morning." "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Your case can wait," she interrupted, embracing me carefully to avoid disturbing my balance with the walker. "I got a very strange call from Roger last night, talking about your declining condition and urgent decisions that needed to be made about your living situation. When I couldn't reach you this morning, I caught the first flight I could. The pieces immediately fell into place. Roger, thwarted in his attempt to bring realtors directly to my home, had tried a different approach, convincing Sarah that my condition was deteriorating and required immediate intervention, likely hoping she would defer to him as the family member on the ground, authorizing steps that would ultimately lead to the property sale he and Diane had already begun planning. "I'm perfectly fine," I assured her, gesturing toward Mabel. "We've been meeting with Harold Bennett to update my legal documents. My phone was probably off during the appointment." Sarah looked from me to Mabel, confusion evident in her expression. "Legal documents?" Roger made it sound like you were barely managing, possibly confused from pain medication, and needed family to step in immediately. "I think we should continue this conversation inside," Mabel suggested, nodding toward Mrs. Peterson's house across the street, where my neighbor was making a rather obvious show of watering plants while watching our interaction with interest. Once inside, with tea prepared and the three of us settled in the living room, I explained everything: the gradual pressure from Roger and Diane, the surprise visit with realtors, the discovery of the missing documents and unauthorized coming soon listing, and our meeting with Harold to establish legal protections. Sarah's expression transformed from confusion to shock, and finally to a cold anger I had rarely seen from my typically composed daughter. "They tried to sell your house out from under you," she said, her attorney's precision making the situation sound even more outrageous when stated so plainly. "And they attempted to manipulate me into helping them by fabricating a medical crisis." "That appears to be the case," I confirmed. "We're taking steps to prevent any further attempts, but I wanted to handle it without creating a family schism if possible." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "I think that ship has sailed, Mom. What they've tried to do goes beyond a simple disagreement or misunderstanding. It's exploitation, possibly fraud, and definitely a betrayal of your trust." She was right, of course. Despite my reluctance to completely sever family ties, Roger and Diane's actions had fundamentally changed our relationship in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. "What matters now is protecting you and your home," Sarah continued, her professional problem-solving mode fully engaged. "I'll stay through the weekend at minimum. I want to meet with Harold, review all the new documents, and make sure everything is airtight. And I definitely want to be here when Roger and Diane show up for their planned Friday discussion." The thought of that confrontation, now with Sarah present as an additional witness and advocate, was both daunting and oddly satisfying. For too long, Roger and Diane had operated under the assumption that I was alone and vulnerable. The reality they would soon face was quite different. A prepared homeowner with legal protections in place, professional credentials that undermined their claims of incapacity, and family support they had never anticipated encountering. "Friday should be enlightening," Mabel observed with the subtle smile that had made town council members nervous for decades, particularly when they discover exactly who they've been trying to outmaneuver. As we finalized plans for the coming days, Sarah would accompany me to sign the new legal documents tomorrow, then help prepare for Friday's confrontation. I felt a surprising sense of gratitude amid the turmoil. Not for Roger and Diane's betrayal, certainly, but for the clarity it had provided. Their actions had revealed not just their true characters, but also the strength of my genuine support network and my own capabilities when challenged. They had seen an elderly woman recovering from surgery and assumed vulnerability. What they would soon encounter was something quite different: a prepared opponent who had spent decades building not just a house, but a home surrounded by community, legal protections, and family loyalty they had severely underestimated. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The 2 days before our planned confrontation with Roger and Diane passed in a whirlwind of preparation and legal reinforcement. Sarah, having postponed her court appearance through an associate, threw herself into understanding every aspect of the situation with the thoroughness that had made her a rising star in corporate law. Thursday morning, we met again with Harold Bennett to sign the revised legal documents, my new will, healthcare directive, property trust, and durable power of attorney, all explicitly naming Sarah as my representative and containing specific language revoking any previous versions that might exist. "These are about as airtight as legal documents can be," Harold assured us as I signed the final page with a flourish that belied my 73 years. We've included multiple witnesses, notarization, and explicit statements about your mental competence and freedom from coercion. Sarah reviewed each document with professional scrutiny before adding her signature where required. "And you filed the complaint with the Real Estate Commission?" she asked Harold. "Submitted yesterday afternoon," he confirmed. "They've already responded with a preliminary acknowledgement and have flagged the unauthorized listing for immediate review." The cease and desist letters, one to Panorama Realty and one to Roger and Diane, had been delivered by courier that morning, timed to arrive after we had secured the legal protections but before our scheduled Friday meeting. Perfect timing, Sarah had observed when Harold confirmed delivery. They'll have just enough time to panic, but not enough to develop a coherent counter-strategy. My daughter's strategic thinking reminded me of her father. Frank had approached carpentry projects with the same methodical planning, considering all angles before making the first cut. It was reassuring to see that practical intelligence deployed in my defense. By Thursday evening, everything was in place for the confrontation. The house had been subtly prepared as well, documents strategically arranged on the dining room table, my real estate license and continuing education certificates, now framed and hanging in the entryway, and a new security camera discreetly installed on the front porch, courtesy of Sarah's foresight. "Not that we expect anything dramatic," she had explained while setting up the small device, "but a record of who enters and exits might prove useful, especially given their previous unannounced visit with realtors." We had decided that Mabel would join us for the meeting, providing both additional witness support and her encyclopedic knowledge of local property regulations. Harold would remain on standby, available by phone if legal questions arose that Sarah couldn't address. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that showcased my garden at its finest. Irises in full bloom along the walkway, the early roses just beginning to open, and the vegetable beds showing the first promising green shoots of tomatoes and peppers. As I performed my knee exercises and prepared for the day ahead, I found myself drawing strength from the home around me, from the physical manifestation of decades of care and intention. This house, like me, had been underestimated. From its humble beginnings as a starter home with good bones, it had developed into something remarkable, solid, beautiful, full of character that couldn't be replicated by newer construction. We had both been dismissed as outdated, as candidates for replacement rather than preservation, and we would both prove that assumption wrong. Roger and Diane were scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock. By 1:30, Sarah, Mabel, and I were positioned in the living room, with refreshments set out as if this were any normal family visit. Sarah had suggested this touch, the appearance of routine hospitality that would contrast sharply with the serious matters to be discussed. "It establishes that you're the one in control of this environment," she explained. "Not them." At precisely 1:55, the security camera alerted us to a car pulling into the driveway. Roger's silver SUV, with both him and Diane visible inside. From my position near the window, I watched them engage in what appeared to be a tense conversation before emerging from the vehicle. "They've received the cease and desist letter," Mabel observed, noting the thick envelope Roger carried along with a leather portfolio. "And they've brought documentation of their own." "Good," Sarah said with the calm confidence of someone entering a negotiation she knew she would win. "That means we can address everything at once." The doorbell rang, and Sarah moved to answer it while I remained seated. A deliberate choice. That asserted my position as the homeowner while acknowledging my recovery status. Mabel positioned herself near the dining room with its display of prepared documents, ready to guide the conversation in that direction when the time came. "Roger, Diane," Sarah greeted them with professional courtesy as she opened the door. "Thank you for coming. Mom is in the living room." Their surprise at finding Sarah present was evident in their expressions. Roger's eyebrows shooting up, Diane's smile faltering momentarily before she recovered. "Sarah, we didn't know you were in town," Roger said, his forced cheer more pronounced than usual. Wonderful to see you. I came as soon as I heard about the urgent concerns regarding Mom's condition, Sarah replied, her tone pleasant but her meaning clear. Naturally, I wanted to be part of any important family discussions about her well-being. She led them into the living room, where I greeted them with a composure I was proud to maintain despite the tumult of emotions beneath the surface: hurt, anger, disappointment, and beneath it all, a steely determination. Roger, Diane. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Would you like some tea? They settled uneasily on the sofa across from my armchair, both declining refreshments. Roger placed his portfolio and the envelope, clearly our cease and desist letter, on the coffee table between us. Aunt Dorothy, he began, glancing nervously at Sarah and Mabel before continuing. We received a rather concerning letter yesterday. There seems to be some misunderstanding about our discussions regarding your living situation. I don't believe there's any misunderstanding, I replied calmly. The letter accurately represents my position. I have not authorized any actions regarding the sale of my home, nor will I be doing so. Roger shifted uncomfortably. This letter mentions a real estate listing, but I assure you, we haven't listed your property for sale. We've simply had preliminary conversations with professionals about options that might be available to you. Actually, Mabel interjected, moving forward to place a printed copy of the Coming Soon listing on the coffee table. This was found on the agent preview section of Panorama Realty's website. It describes this property in specific detail, including the award-winning perennial gardens and preparation for a June market debut. Diane's face flushed. That's just a general neighborhood listing. Many homes in this area have gardens. Interesting theory, Sarah said, her courtroom manner emerging as she placed additional documents beside the listing. Except we have confirmation from the Real Estate Commission that the property referenced is indeed this address, and that Heather Blackwell created the listing based on information provided by you, Roger. Roger's expression hardened, the pretense of confusion falling away. We were trying to help. This house is too much for Aunt Dorothy to manage, especially after surgery. We've seen how these situations progress. First it's knee pain, then it's an inability to maintain the property, then a fall or worse. We're being proactive for her safety and financial security. My safety and financial security are not your responsibility, nor your decision to make, I stated firmly. I have managed this home successfully since Frank's death 8 years ago. One knee surgery doesn't change that. With all due respect, Aunt Dorothy, Diane interjected, her tone making the respectful words sound anything but. You don't see what we see. The gutter that needed cleaning last fall. The fence post that's still loose. The steps that need repainting. These are all signs that the property is becoming too much. Those are signs of normal home maintenance, not incapacity, I countered. The gutter was cleaned by the service I've used for years. The fence post is awaiting a specific part that's been ordered, and the steps are scheduled for repainting next month when the weather is consistently warm enough for proper curing. I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze directly. I have a maintenance schedule and budget for this property that has served me well for decades. What I don't have is any intention of selling my home to satisfy your notions of what's appropriate for someone my age. Roger opened his portfolio, extracting several glossy brochures. We've been researching excellent senior living options. Riverside Gardens has private apartments with emergency call buttons in every room. Golden Sunset Villas offers chef-prepared meals and transportation to medical appointments. These communities are designed for. I'm well aware of what they're designed for, I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. I'm also aware of their costs, restrictions, and limitations compared to independent homeownership. I've made my decision to remain in my home, and that decision is not open for debate. Mom has extensively researched aging-in-place options, Sarah added, including home modifications, service providers, and technology solutions that support independent living. She's been remarkably proactive, as evidenced by the main floor bedroom renovation completed years ago. Roger's expression shifted to something harder, more calculating. The reality is, Aunt Dorothy, that your memory and judgment have been concerning us for some time. The confusion after surgery, the missed calls, the difficulty keeping track of maintenance issues, these are signs that shouldn't be ignored. This was the moment they revealed their true strategy. Not just pressure about the physical demands of homeownership, but insinuations about my mental capacity. It was a common tactic in elder exploitation cases, as both Mabel and Harold had warned me, and one I was fully prepared to counter. "That's a serious allegation," I said, keeping my voice measured. "One that would require medical documentation from healthcare providers familiar with my condition. Do you have such documentation?" "We're not making medical claims," Diane backpedaled quickly. "Just observations from family who care about you. Observations that conveniently support your desire to sell a valuable property in a rapidly appreciating market," Sarah noted, her tone mild but the accusation clear. "That's unfair," Roger protested. "This isn't about money." "Isn't it?" I asked, genuinely curious if he believed his own justification. "The timing of your increased concern coincides precisely with the rise in neighborhood property values. You showed no such worries before the Henderson house sold for record numbers." Before Roger could respond, Sarah gestured toward the dining room. "I think we should move to the table. There are several matters we need to discuss with full documentation." The change in venue was strategic, placing them literally on the other side of the table from us, with the extensive documentation we had prepared spread out for reference. As we settled into our chairs, Roger and Diane now visibly tense, Sarah took the lead. "Let's establish some facts," she began, laying out key documents one by one. "First, Mom has been evaluated by her primary physician and orthopedic surgeon within the past month, with no concerns noted about cognitive function or capacity for independent living." She placed the medical clearances in front of them. "Second, Mom maintains active involvement in multiple community organizations, including teaching quilting classes, serving on the library board, and coordinating the neighborhood garden exchange program." Letters from the community center director and library board president joined the medical documents. "Third, Mom has documentation of all home maintenance completed and scheduled, with appropriate vendor contracts and receipts." The maintenance binder, meticulously updated since Frank's death, was added to the growing array of evidence. And finally, Sarah concluded, placing my framed real estate license in the center of the table. "Mom completed the required coursework and examination to become a licensed real estate agent last year, demonstrating both her cognitive abilities and her specific knowledge of property matters." The silence that followed was profound. Roger stared at the license, then at me, genuine shock replacing his previous confidence. "You got your real estate license? At 73? Diane finally asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "I did," I confirmed. "Initially for educational purposes, to better understand property regulations and protections. It's proven even more valuable than anticipated." "The license establishes a legal presumption of competence in property transactions that would be extremely difficult to overcome," Mabel added, her tone matter of fact, "particularly given the documentation of continued professional education and the recent passing of state examinations with high scores." Roger's expression had transformed from shock to something approaching calculation. "Why didn't you mention this when we brought up selling the house?" "For the same reason you didn't mention you were already working with a realtor to list my property without my consent," I replied evenly. "Some things are revealed only when necessary." Sarah opened a folder containing copies of our newly filed legal documents. "We've taken additional steps to clarify Mom's wishes and protect her interests. New versions of her will, healthcare directive, and power of attorney have been executed and filed with the county. The property has been placed in a protective trust. And as you're aware from the cease and desist letter, Any attempts to market or sell the property without explicit written authorization constitute both ethical violations and potential legal liability. Roger's face had reddened progressively throughout Sarah's presentation. Now he pushed back from the table abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We were trying to help, to spare you difficult decisions before they became crises. If you're determined to stay in this house until something catastrophic happens, that's your choice. But don't expect us to pick up the pieces when it does." "I've never expected that," I said quietly. What I expected, what I had a right to expect, was respect for my autonomy and honesty about your intentions. Instead, you attempted to sell my home behind my back, created a false narrative about my capacity, and even tried to manipulate my daughter with fabricated concerns about my condition. Diane stood as well, gathering her purse with trembling hands. "We should go. Clearly, we're not welcome here." "You're welcome as family who respects boundaries," I clarified. "You're not welcome as people who believe they have the right to make decisions about my property or my life without my consent." "This isn't what Uncle Frank would have wanted," Roger said, a final attempt to claim moral authority through my late husband's memory. "He would have wanted you taken care of." It was the wrong approach. Frank had been a fierce advocate for independence and dignity, qualities he had demonstrated throughout his life, and especially in his final years. "Frank wanted exactly what I want," I replied, rising from my chair with the aid of my cane, the walker now unnecessary for short distances. "To live with purpose and autonomy in the home we built together, for as long as I'm able." He taught you better than this, Roger. He taught you about respect and integrity, about helping without controlling. Somewhere along the way, you've forgotten those lessons. The truth of my words seemed to land briefly, as something like shame flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by defensive anger. "We're done here," he announced, heading for the door with Diane following closely. "When you change your mind, and you will, don't call us for help." Sarah walked them to the door, her professional demeanor never wavering. "I've prepared a summary of today's discussion and the agreements reached," she said, handing Roger a sealed envelope. "Primarily that you will cease all attempts to market, sell, or otherwise interfere with Mom's property, and that any future discussions about her living situation will include her legal representatives." Roger took the envelope without response, and moments later, they were gone. The security camera capturing their hasty departure, and Roger's animated gestures as they argued all the way to their car. When Sarah returned to the dining room, the three of us sat in momentary silence, processing the confrontation and its implications. "Well," Mabel finally said with characteristic practicality, "that went about as expected." "Better, actually," Sarah observed. "They didn't deny the unauthorized listing or challenge any of our documentation. That would have been difficult to defend in court, but their immediate retreat essentially concedes the facts." I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the immediate threat to my home had been neutralized, sadness at the likely permanent fracture in family relationships, and a surprising sense of empowerment from having successfully defended my autonomy. "What happens now?" I asked, looking from Sarah to Mabel. "Legally, we're in a strong position," Sarah explained. "The cease and desist has been delivered and acknowledged. The Real Estate Commission is investigating the unauthorized listing. Your new legal documents are in place. From a protection standpoint, we've done everything necessary. And from a family standpoint?" I pressed, the more difficult question hanging between us. Sarah sighed, her professional facade softening. "That's harder to predict. Roger and Diane are humiliated and angry right now. They may eventually recognize their overreach and attempt reconciliation, or they may double down on their position that they were acting in your best interest. Either way," Mabel added, "the dynamic has been permanently altered. They now know you're not the vulnerable target they assumed, that you have both the capacity and the resources to protect yourself. That's valuable information, regardless of how the relationship evolves. She was right. Whatever happened with Roger and Diane moving forward, they would never again see me as merely an elderly relative to be managed or a property opportunity to be exploited. They would see a woman who had surrounded herself with knowledge, support, and legal protections, who had met their attempt at control with a more effective counter-strategy. The three of us spent the remainder of the afternoon on more pleasant activities, a celebratory dinner that Sarah cooked in my kitchen, reminiscences about Frank and the early days of the house, and plans for some garden improvements I had been considering for the backyard. "I'm thinking of adding a raised bed section," I explained as we enjoyed coffee on the porch after dinner. "Easier access as my knee continues to recover, and a chance to try some new vegetable varieties this summer." "I love that you're still planning improvements," Sarah said, a smile softening her features in the evening light. "Still looking forward, still creating." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. "This house has never been static. It's grown and changed as our family did, adapted to new needs, incorporated new ideas. That's what makes it a home rather than just a structure." Before Sarah returned to the city on Sunday, we implemented several additional safeguards that would support my continued independence. A medical alert system was installed, not because I felt at risk, but because it represented a reasonable precaution that undermined any future claims about safety concerns. A local handyman service was contracted for regular maintenance checks, documenting the property's ongoing upkeep, and a weekly video call schedule was established with Sarah, providing both connection and another form of capacity documentation. "Not that we expect further challenges," Sarah explained as she programmed the new arrangements into my calendar, "but prudent preparations prevent problems." It was a phrase Frank had often used during home improvement projects, and hearing it from our daughter in this context felt like a completion of a circle. Wisdom passed down, adapted to new circumstances, but still fundamentally sound. In the months that followed, life settled into a new pattern. My knee healed completely, allowing me to resume all my previous activities plus some new ones, including occasionally assisting at the community center's home ownership workshops, where my real estate knowledge proved unexpectedly valuable to first-time buyers navigating complex regulations. Roger and Diane maintained their distance, declining the Thanksgiving invitation I sent as a tentative peace offering. But the rupture remained contained to their immediate family. Roger's siblings and their children still visited occasionally, careful to avoid mentioning the conflict, but maintaining the connection nonetheless. The "coming soon" listing disappeared from Panorama Realty's website within days of our confrontation, and Heather Blackwell received a formal reprimand from the Real Estate Commission for creating marketing materials without proper owner authorization. She sent a written apology, explaining that she had been misled about the ownership situation and expressing regret for her role in the incident. Perhaps the most significant development, however, came 6 months after the confrontation, when Sarah called with unexpected news. "Mom, I've been offered a partnership position with a law firm in Riverdale," she announced, her excitement palpable even through the phone. "They're expanding their elder law practice and want someone with corporate experience to develop estate planning services for business owners." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely delighted at the prospect of having her closer. "But what about your position at the city firm? I thought you were on track for partnership there too." "I was," she acknowledged, "but this opportunity offers something more valuable: quality of life, connection to community, and being close enough to have Sunday dinners with my mother regularly, rather than quarterly visits squeezed between court appearances." There was a pause before she added, "The situation with Roger made me realize something important. I've been so focused on career advancement that I've missed opportunities for the kind of deep community connections you've built. Watching how your neighbors rallied around you, how people like Mabel have been part of your life for decades, it made me reconsider what success really looks like." By the following spring, Sarah and her family had relocated to Riverdale, purchasing a charming colonial just 3 streets from my home, close enough for regular visits but far enough to maintain our independent lives. Her children, my grandchildren, became frequent visitors, learning to garden in my backyard, helping with small home improvement projects, absorbing the legacy of care and craftsmanship that Frank had once shared with Roger. On the anniversary of our confrontation with Roger and Diane, Mabel joined Sarah and me for dinner on my wraparound porch, the setting sun painting the neighborhood in golden light as children played in yards up and down Maple Street. "Did you ever imagine a year ago that things would unfold this way?" Mabel asked, gesturing toward Sarah helping her children plant sunflower seeds along my fence line. "Never," I admitted. "I was focused on keeping my home, on not being displaced. I never considered that the crisis might actually bring Sarah closer, might create a stronger sense of family than we had before." "That's often how it works," Mabel observed with the wisdom of her 78 years. "We fight to preserve what matters, only to discover that the fight itself reveals what truly matters." She was right. The attempted sale of my house had been a violation, a betrayal that still held remnants of pain when I allowed myself to dwell on it. But it had also catalyzed positive changes I couldn't have anticipated. Sarah's return to Riverdale, my deeper engagement with community education, new connections with neighbors who had rallied to support me during recovery. Most importantly, it had transformed how I viewed my own capabilities in my 70s. No longer was I simply maintaining the status quo, preserving what Frank and I had built. I was actively creating new dimensions to my life, new contributions to my community, new legacies to pass along to the next generation. Roger and Diane had seen an aging woman in a vintage house, both presumably diminished by time and ready for replacement with newer models. What they failed to recognize was that both the woman and the house had developed something more valuable than newness, a depth of character, a resilience, and a place in the community fabric that couldn't be replicated or replaced. As twilight settled over Maple Street and my grandchildren excitedly marked where their sunflowers would bloom in summer, I reflected on Frank's words from decades earlier when we first viewed this modest bungalow with its peeling paint and potential. "This place has good bones. It just needs some love and patience." He had been right about the house, and, as it turned out, about me as well. Good bones, love, patience. And when necessary, the strength to fight for what matters most. 5 years have passed since that pivotal confrontation in my dining room. At 78, I still wake each morning in the same bedroom where Frank and I spent decades of marriage, still tend the garden that has become a neighborhood showcase, and still host weekly quilting circles in the sunroom we added during our 35th anniversary renovations. The maple tree we planted when we first moved in now towers majestically in the front yard, its branches providing shade for the porch swing where I often sit in the evenings, watching the neighborhood children play just as their parents once did. What has changed, profoundly, is my understanding of what this home truly represents. Not just a building with good bones that Frank and I improved over the years, but a center of community, a repository of wisdom, and now, somewhat unexpectedly, a model for what aging with dignity and purpose can look like. The walls that Roger and Diane saw as a maintenance burden have become something much more significant. The foundation for a new chapter of contribution that I never could have anticipated during those tense days of recovery and confrontation. The story of how I blocked Roger and Diane's attempt to sell my house spread through Riverdale like wildfire after our confrontation. Initially, I was mortified by the attention, the sympathetic glances at the grocery store, the not-so-subtle inquiries about my well-being at church functions. Being at the center of a family scandal was never my ambition, and there were days when I wished the whole episode could simply be forgotten. People will talk for a while, then something else will catch their attention, Mabel assured me during Those uncomfortable early weeks as we sorted through the community grapevine's embellishments of what had actually occurred. But in the meantime, your experience might actually help others in similar situations. She was right, as usual. Within months, 3 other senior homeowners in Riverdale approached me privately with stories of family members pressuring them to sell or downsize against their wishes. They sought advice not just on legal protections, but on the emotional aspects of standing firm against loved ones who claimed to know what was best. "How did you find the courage to confront your nephew?" Eleanor Simmons asked over tea in my kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she described her son's increasing insistence that her Victorian home was too much house for a widow. "I don't want to damage my relationship with my only child, but this is my home. I've lived here for 43 years. I'm not ready to leave it." Eleanor was 82, a retired librarian whose husband had passed away 3 years earlier. Her son, a successful accountant in the city, had been gradually increasing pressure for her to move to a retirement community near his family. Each visit included house tours arranged without her prior knowledge, brochures left on her coffee table, and not-so-subtle comments about the danger of stairs for someone her age. The courage came from recognizing that true family relationships are built on respect, not control, I told her, pouring more tea into her delicate china cup, part of a wedding set she'd cherished for over 60 years. Protecting your autonomy isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining your dignity and their respect. We talked for hours that afternoon, discussing specific strategies Eleanor could implement, documenting her son's comments and actions as I had done with Roger, securing her legal documents with an attorney of her own choosing rather than her son's helpful friend, and creating a comprehensive home maintenance schedule that addressed her son's stated concerns about the property's upkeep. Eleanor left with a list of resources: Harold Bennett's contact information, details about the real estate course I had taken, information about home maintenance services that could address her son's practical concerns. She also left with something less tangible, but perhaps more valuable: the confidence that came from knowing someone else had successfully navigated similar waters. 2 weeks later, she called to report a breakthrough. I showed him the bound maintenance schedule and the contracts with the local handyman service, she told me, her voice stronger than during our first conversation. Then I said, "I understand your concerns, but I've addressed them. This discussion about selling my home is now closed." He seemed shocked at first, but then he actually apologized for pushing too hard. We had the first honest conversation we've had in months. Eleanor's success story spread, as did mine. Soon, other seniors began reaching out, some facing similar pressure from family members, others simply wanting to proactively protect their housing choices. These conversations happened with increasing frequency, eventually leading to something I never anticipated: a formal support group for senior homeowners, meeting monthly in my living room. Aging in Place with Purpose, we called it, focusing not just on the practical aspects of maintaining independence, but on the deeper questions of meaning and legacy that accompanied this stage of life. We discussed everything from legal protections and home modifications to the philosophical dimensions of aging, what it meant to maintain connection to place and community, how our homes carried memories and identity that couldn't be easily transferred to institutional settings. Sarah, whose elder law practice was flourishing in Riverdale, occasionally joined as a guest speaker, providing legal updates and document reviews. Her perspective was invaluable, combining professional expertise with the personal insights gained from witnessing her mother's experience. "What many families don't understand," she explained during one session, "is that removing an elder from a familiar environment often accelerates cognitive decline rather than preventing it. There's extensive research showing that maintaining connection to place, especially a long-term home with established routines and memory triggers, can actually support cognitive health far better than a new, unfamiliar setting." Mabel brought her administrative expertise, helping members organize their affairs with the same efficiency she had once brought to town governance, Her filing systems for important documents became legendary, with color-coded folders and clear instructions for emergency contacts that several medical professionals in town began recommending to all their senior patients. Local contractors offered workshops on home modifications that could support changing physical needs without sacrificing character or charm. We learned about zero-threshold showers that preserved vintage bathroom aesthetics, subtle handrail installations that blended with historic woodwork, and lighting improvements that enhanced safety without changing the warm ambiance of century-old homes. What began as 6 nervous seniors sharing concerns over coffee expanded to a vibrant community of 25 regular attendees, with a waiting list for new members and requests to establish similar groups in neighboring towns. We developed a lending library of resources, a tool-sharing program for maintenance projects, and a volunteer exchange where members offered their various skills to help each other with tasks that had become challenging. "You've created something remarkable here," Sarah observed after one particularly lively meeting, where members had shared strategies for winterizing historic homes while on fixed incomes. "This isn't just about keeping people in their houses, it's about maintaining their place in the community fabric." She was right. What had started as defensive, protecting individual homes from unwanted sales, had evolved into something proactive and generative. We were collectively reimagining what growing older in a cherished home could look like when supported by knowledge, resources, and community connection. The impact extended beyond our immediate group. The local newspaper ran a feature on our efforts, highlighting how our approach contrasted with the standard narrative of aging that presumed institutional care as the inevitable destination. Several community organizations began reconsidering their senior services, shifting from a deficit-focused model that emphasized limitations to a strength-based approach that recognized the continuing contributions of older residents. Through all of this growing community engagement, one relationship remained noticeably fractured. Roger and Diane maintained their distance during this period, their embarrassment at having their scheme exposed apparently outweighing any familial bonds. They declined holiday invitations and avoided community events where we might encounter each other. When we did cross paths at the grocery store or bank, interactions were stiffly polite but brief. It saddened me, but I had come to accept that some relationships cannot survive the revelation of uncomfortable truths. The betrayal had cut deeply, and while I had moved forward with my life in unexpected positive ways, I had resigned myself to the probability that Roger would never again be part of it in any meaningful sense. Then, 3 years after our confrontation, the unexpected happened. Roger appeared on my porch one Sunday afternoon, alone and visibly uncomfortable, clutching a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. I was trimming roses near the front steps when he approached, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other, the weight of unspoken history hanging between us. "Aunt Dorothy," he greeted me formally, his voice carrying a nervousness I hadn't heard since he was a boy coming to our home after troubles with his father. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not," I assured him, genuinely surprised by his presence. "Would you like to come in?" He hesitated, then nodded, following me into the living room where so much had changed and yet remained fundamentally the same. The furniture Frank had built still anchored the space, though now accompanied by the latest medical alert system discreetly mounted near the doorway. Not because I needed it yet, but because preparation had become my watchword. "The house looks good," Roger offered awkwardly, glancing around at the well-maintained woodwork and the fresh paint that brightened the walls. "You've kept it up well." "Thank you," I replied, waiting patiently for him to explain his unexpected visit. The silence, stretched between us, filled with unspoken apologies and accusations, regrets and resentments. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he extended the package. "I found this when we were cleaning out Dad's garage last month. I thought you should have it." I unwrapped the paper carefully to reveal a wooden box, beautifully crafted with dovetailed joints and a hand-rubbed finish that spoke of meticulous craftsmanship. I recognized it immediately. Frank had made it as a demonstration piece while teaching Roger woodworking basics during one difficult summer when the boy had sought refuge with us. I had forgotten its existence until this moment, but seeing it brought back vivid memories of Frank's patient instruction and Roger's proud accomplishment when the project was complete. "Frank was so proud of how quickly you learned," I said softly, running my fingers over the smooth maple surface that had somehow maintained its luster through decades of storage. "He said you had a natural feel for the wood, that you understood its grain and movement instinctively." Roger swallowed hard, emotion flickering across his face. He was patient with me. More patient than Dad ever was. He paused, struggling visibly with what to say next. "I've been thinking a lot about Uncle Frank lately. About the kind of man he was, the way he treated people with respect, even when he disagreed with them." I waited, sensing there was more coming, that this wooden box represented not just a physical object being returned, but perhaps a symbolic gesture toward reconnection. "I handled things badly, Aunt Dorothy. With the house, with the realtors, with all of it." The admission seemed physically painful for him to voice, each word costing him considerable effort. "Diane and we convinced ourselves we were acting in your best interest. But looking back, it's clear we were thinking more about the potential property value than about what this home means to you." It was the closest thing to an apology I expected to receive, delivered with difficulty but apparent sincerity. Not a complete accounting of the betrayal, but an acknowledgement that wrong had been done, that motivations had been less pure than claimed. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said simply, neither absolving nor condemning, but accepting the partial truth he offered. "This house isn't just walls and a roof to me. It's the physical embodiment of the life Frank and I built together, of the family memories we created, of our place in this community." "I understand that better now," Roger admitted, his gaze moving to the photographs lining my mantel. Frank and me on our wedding day, Sarah's childhood milestones, Roger himself as a teenager proudly displaying a walleye caught from the creek behind our property. Watching Dad struggle with his move to assisted living, it's been eye-opening. He keeps talking about wanting to go home, even though he hasn't lived in that house for 20 years since Mom died. There's something profound about the connection to place that I didn't fully grasp before. Edward, Frank's brother and Roger's father, had always been a difficult man, quick to anger and slow to praise. His recent health decline had forced a move to assisted living, a transition that had apparently provided Roger with unexpected perspective on the significance of home and belonging. We talked for nearly an hour, not about reconciliation exactly, but about understanding, about the lessons he was learning through his father's difficult transition, about the community support group I had helped establish, about the ways his own perspective on aging had begun to shift as he entered his 60s and contemplated what his later years might hold. "I used to think success meant constant upgrading, bigger house, newer car, better neighborhood," he confessed. "But watching Dad in that facility, surrounded by expensive amenities but missing his old workshop and garden, it's made me question a lot of assumptions." Before leaving, he asked hesitantly, "Would it be all right if I stopped by occasionally? Not to check up on you," he added hastily, seeing my expression. "But to learn. I think there's a lot I could understand better about aging with dignity by seeing how you and your group approach it." It wasn't forgiveness precisely, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that my way of aging might offer wisdom rather than problems to be managed. That perhaps, in protecting my home and autonomy, I had been the one seeing clearly while he had been blinded by cultural assumptions about aging that deserved questioning. "You'd be welcome," I told him. "We meet the first Thursday of each month. Mabel brings lemon cookies, and Eleanor usually has a legal update from her research." He didn't attend the very next meeting, but he did come to one 3 months later, sitting quietly in the back, listening more than speaking. His presence raised eyebrows among group members who knew our history, but true to the spirit of our community, he was treated with cautious welcome rather than suspicion. Over time, his attendance became more regular, his participation more genuine. He shared insights from his father's continuing struggles with institutional living and began offering his own expertise on home maintenance issues, particularly plumbing and electrical systems where his knowledge was genuinely valuable. He never mentioned our confrontation directly in these group settings, but occasionally he would make comments that acknowledged his shifting perspective. "I used to think aging in place was just stubbornness," he said during one discussion. "Now I see it's about maintaining identity and purpose. There's wisdom in choosing continuity over disruption when possible." Diane never joined him at these gatherings, and I never pressed the issue. When I inquired once, gently, about her absence, Roger simply said, "She's on a different path." Some bridges remained too damaged for repair, and I had made peace with that reality. The partial reconciliation with Roger was more than I had expected and provided its own form of closure. The most meaningful development of these past 5 years, however, has been the transformation of my home into something I never anticipated: a living classroom for intergenerational learning. What began as a private residence fighting to remain so has become, ironically, one of the most public and community-oriented homes in Riverdale. It started organically when Sarah's children, my grandchildren, became interested in the practical skills Frank and I had used to build and maintain our home. At ages 10 and 12, they were fascinated by the stories embedded in every renovation, every garden bed, every piece of handcrafted furniture. "Could you teach us how to make a birdhouse like Grandpa Frank made?" my grandson Jacob asked one rainy Saturday, pointing to the cedar structure that had housed generations of wrens in our backyard. "The one with the special sloped roof that keeps the rain out but lets the birds see predators coming?" Jacob's interest wasn't surprising. He had always been a thoughtful, mechanically minded child. What was unexpected was his sister Emma's immediate enthusiasm. "And can we learn quilting too? I want to make something like that," she added, pointing to the wall hanging that documented our family history through carefully pieced fabric. That simple request launched weekend workshops where neighborhood children gathered in my garage-turned-workshop to learn basic carpentry, quilting, and gardening skills. We started with birdhouses, progressed to simple furniture pieces, and eventually tackled more complex projects like building raised garden beds and restoring antique chairs found at yard sales. Parents initially dropped their children off, then began staying to observe, and eventually requested their own workshops on home maintenance basics and traditional crafts. Young couples who had purchased older homes in the neighborhood sought advice on preserving original features while updating for energy efficiency. Single mothers wanted to learn basic repairs to avoid costly service calls for simple fixes. "There's something beautiful about watching you teach the children the same way you taught me," Sarah remarked during one such session, as I demonstrated how to measure twice and cut once to an attentive group of 10-year-olds. "These aren't just skills you're passing on. It's a way of seeing the world, of valuing craftsmanship and care." She was right. The technical skills mattered, but the underlying philosophy, approaching one's home and community with intention and commitment, was the more significant legacy. I was teaching not just how to build birdhouses, but how to create nurturing environments, not just how to mend fabric, but how to strengthen the social fabric that held our neighborhood together. Last spring, the local community college approached me about formalizing these casual teaching sessions into an official continuing education course called Traditional Home Skills for Modern Living. Twice monthly, my living room and workshop now host students ranging from young homeowners to fellow seniors, all eager to learn everything from basic plumbing repairs to furniture restoration to energy-efficient updates for historic properties. The waiting list is now 30 people long, the continuing education director informed me recently, reviewing the enrollment figures for the upcoming semester. "Would you consider adding another session each month? Or perhaps training a few apprentice instructors who could expand the program?" The suggestion of apprentices particularly appealed to me. The opportunity to ensure these skills and perspectives would continue circulating through the community, even when I eventually could no longer teach. Already, 3 of my senior group members had begun assisting with classes, each sharing their particular expertise. Eleanor with period-appropriate interior design, Mabel with document organization systems for home maintenance, and surprisingly, Roger with electrical troubleshooting. Techniques. At 78, I find myself busier and more engaged than many people decades younger. My calendar fills with teaching commitments, community group leadership, and the regular maintenance that keeps my beloved home in excellent condition. My knee occasionally protests after a particularly active day in the garden, but regular exercise and physical therapy keep me mobile and strong. I'm careful not to overextend. I've learned the importance of pacing and delegation, but the purposeful activity supports my health rather than diminishing it. The irony isn't lost on me. The home that Roger and Diane claimed was too much for me to manage has become the center of a vibrant community education initiative, the gathering place for a thriving support network, and a model for aging with purpose that has drawn attention from senior advocacy organizations across the state. The very characteristics they saw as liabilities, its age, its history, its established place in the neighborhood, have proven to be its greatest assets and mine. Last month, a documentary filmmaker from the State University asked to interview me for a project on innovative approaches to aging in community. As we sat on my wraparound porch, the camera capturing the home that had almost been taken from me, she asked what advice I would give to others facing similar challenges. Know the legal protections available to you, but also know your own worth, I told her, watching a group of neighborhood children cross my front lawn on their way home from school, waving to me as they passed. Aging doesn't diminish your right to self-determination or your capacity for contribution. Sometimes the house you've loved for decades isn't a burden to escape, but a platform for your most meaningful chapter yet. After the interview, Sarah joined me for tea in the kitchen where we had shared so many conversations over the years. So that's my story. How an attempted real estate scheme led to unexpected growth and renewal instead of loss. If you're watching this and finding yourself concerned about vulnerable property owners in your community, remember that knowledge and preparation are powerful protections. Check on your elderly neighbors. Support their independence. Recognize that gray hair doesn't equate to diminished capacity or readiness to surrender autonomy. And if you're a senior homeowner yourself, consider taking the proactive steps that helped me maintain control of my property and my choices. Document your wishes legally, stay engaged with your community, and perhaps most importantly, never stop learning new skills that demonstrate your ongoing competence. The house you save may be your own, along with the dignity, independence, and community connections that make it truly a home. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to my channel. Next week, I'll be sharing specific legal protections every homeowner over 60 should consider implementing, along with resources to help you get started. Remember, age brings wisdom, experience, and rights that deserve respect. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.